Have you ever been to a wax museum or on a ghost train and thought that the props looked a little bit too real? Well, they might just be. This is the unbelievably true story of Elmer McCurdy, the man who accidentally became a carnival attraction and even a movie prop years after his death. In this story, we'll find out how nobody noticed the mannequin they were using was actually a real person. Before we get into the absolutely bizarre parts of this story, I just want to let you know a little bit about Elmer and how he actually died. Let's just say Elmer is the kind of man who'd fall into a barrel of boobs and come out still sucking his thumb. Elmer was born on New Year's Day 1880 to an unmarried teenager. Now, in the 1880s, that was definitely frowned upon. So Elmer already had a rough start to his life. Throughout the early years of Elmer's life, he'd tried all different jobs, but to be honest, he was rubbish at all of them. So in his 20s, he decided to join the army. In the army, he learnt how to handle explosives, and this would be the beginning of his downfall. By 1911, Elmer had left the army, where he was pretty bored and pretty broke. He decided that the best thing to do was try a criminal career. This man was obsessed with money, but he was no Jesse James. He was more like the Mr. Bean of the Wild West. His first notable robbery was in 1911, straight after he came out of the army. He decided to rob a train, and on that train was $4,000 in a safe. But Elmer was a very unlucky man. He decided to use too much dynamite. He blew the safe to smithereens, melting all of the money inside. The $4,000 that Elmer was supposed to get had now turned into $450 of melted fused silver. On another of his robberies, he decided to rob a bank. Him and his gang spent a whole 2 hours trying to get through the bank wall. Eventually, he turned to his old friend Dynamite and blew the vault wide open. The only issue is, the vault door wrecked the inside of the bank, but didn't touch the safe. The safe was completely closed. He couldn't get into it. So in a panic, they grabbed $150 off the side and left. He was feeling very sorry for himself. Not one to give up, Elmer decided to try another train robbery. His big Jesse James moment. Now, this train carried a huge amount of money, $400,000. Elmer was finally going to be rich. No, he wasn't. Elmer accidentally robbed the wrong train. This poor man. All he got was $46 and 2 bottles of whiskey. A newspaper at the time called it the smallest train robbery in history. Poor Elmer. After being called an idiot by the local journalist, Elmer decided that he would take the 2 bottles of whiskey and drown his sorrows in a hay barn. However, there was now a bounty on Elmer's head, and he woke up to the sound of gunfire. The sheriffs had the hay barn surrounded. Elmer, still drunk, held on for a little while, firing back, but one single bullet hit him straight in the chest, killing him outright. Elmer was gone. For now. Now, if you're a normal thinking brain person, you will think that that's the end of Elmer's story. But this is where it starts to get weird. And the longer that Elmer is dead, the more weird it gets. Local undertaker Joseph Johnson took in Elmer's body. He dressed him in a suit and embalmed him with arsenic. Arsenic was commonly used in those days to embalm bodies. It's basically the Botox of the dead. It literally kept corpses looking fresh for decades. And that is really important to this story. Johnson popped Elmer in the corner of the funeral home and waited for his relatives to come and collect him. Weeks passed and nobody came. Elmer became like a silent colleague for Johnson. Word started to spread around the town that the funeral home had a dead outlaw propped up in the corner. Curiosity brought in the first visitors. At first, they peered in for free, taking a quick, morbid look before they went back to their errands. But as the weeks went on, visitors turned into crowds. Johnson realised that this wasn't a body waiting for a family, it was an attraction. Johnson placed a gun in his hands and started charging a nickel for people to come and see him. Visitors to see Elmer had to place the nickel into Elmer's mouth like a slot machine. He was quickly named the bandit who wouldn't give up. Johnson had absolutely no idea how fitting that name would actually become. For 5 years, Elmer stood in the funeral home making more money in death than he'd ever made in life. Guys, I told you this would get weird, but trust me, this is just the bottom of the barrel. It gets way weirder. In October 1916, 6 years after Elmer died, 2 men turned up to the funeral home claiming to be Elmer's brothers. They said they wanted to take him away and give him a proper burial. Johnson finally said goodbye to Elmer and handed him over to the brothers. Turns out that in 1916, not everybody is as honest as they seem. James and Charles Patterson were actually brothers and Carnival promoters. You can see where this is going, right? They'd heard stories of the Embalmed bandit and decided that sounded like a moneymaker. They took Elmer and made him their star attraction. He was kept in an open coffin and given the backstory of the outlaw who was never caught alive. Now this was a massive attraction for people. People from far and wide came to see Elmer and his rotting corpse. He literally travelled throughout the US with this carnival show, going from small town fairs to big cities, drawing in curious onlookers who wanted to see a dead outlaw. Now, at this point, they knew that this was a real person, but I told you it gets weirder. Okay? After 6 years, the Pattersons got bored of Elmer and decided to sell him. They didn't see Elmer as a person or even a body, he was just basically stock. For them, it was like selling off a busted popcorn machine. In 1922, 11 years after Elmer's death, Louis Sonny purchased Elmer's perfectly preserved corpse. He wanted to add Elmer to his museum of crime. Turns out crime was a money-making attraction in those days. His crime museum was made up of historical weapons, famous criminal wax figures including Bill Doolin and Jesse James. Imagine. If only Elmer knew that he would be hanging out with the greats. Well, Elmer was the only real one. But still, that was what made Elmer so special. He was the real attraction, quite literally the real attraction. Louis renamed Elmer the Embalmed Outlaw. Elmer was so popular with paying customers that Louis was able to travel with Elmer for 3 decades. 3 decades. 30 years. During his time with Louis, time was not very kind to Elmer. Over the 30 years, his skin had become hardened and darkened. He went from perfectly preserved to grotesquely gruesome. Some might say perfect for a career in Hollywood horror movies. 10 years into his time with Louis in 1933, he was loaned to a filmmaker called Dwayne Esper, who was promoting his exploitation film Narcotic. Esper thought Elmer was perfect for promoting this movie. He shoved Elmer into the cinema lobbies to attract paying cinema goers. He was given the backstory of a dead drug addict who'd shot himself after a robbery. Let me just make that a bit more clear to you. They put a dead man outside the cinema to attract cinema goers. Now, if that's not a promotional campaign, I don't know what is. That sounds horrendous. Elmer wasn't just a prop for outside the cinema. He would also go on to star in a few movies. Star is a little bit of a stretch, but just stay with me, okay? After promoting the movie, Elmer got a little bit of a break. He went into storage in Los Angeles for 20 years. On a side note, I always wondered what happens to Buzz and Woody and all the toys in Toy Story when they pass away. Because the human wouldn't know that they're dead. So would they still be playing with dead toys while the other toys watching horror? After quite a while in storage, Dan decided to bring Elmer out for another movie moment. He loaned him to another movie maker, David Friedman, for a low-budget horror movie called She-Freak. This was Elmer's big movie break. She-Freak is actually a movie that is still available to watch, and if you watch carefully, in some of the scenes you can actually see Elmer in the background. I'm sorry, but how insane is that? 55 years after Elmer's death. Let me just say that again. 55 years after Elmer died, he was sold again to showman Spoony Singh, along with some other wax figures for $10,000. $10,000. The kind of money a living Elmer could only dream of. Singh really believed that Elmer was a wax figure. He had no clue that there was real flesh and bone under the thick skin that had become Elmer. 55 years after his death, you can imagine that he looked quite different. Singh didn't actually want Elmer for himself. He was more of a middleman. He brought him on behalf of 2 Canadian showmen. The Canadians exhibited Elmer and the other figures at a show near Mount Rushmore. Being near Mount Rushmore as a mummy is probably not the best idea. A windstorm hit and Elmer lost a few bits and pieces. The tip of his ear, his fingers, his toes. So you can imagine that he wasn't looking too great. The Canadians eventually returned him to Singh. After many complaints from horrified parents, they decided that Elmer was too gruesome and not lifelike enough for the show. Singh did briefly promote Elmer to the horror section, but again, this was even too much for the paying customers. So this time, Singh sold him to the Pike in Long Beach, California. The Pike is a seaside amusement park and it features a haunted house. This was actually Elmer's final stop, and this is where the discovery was made that Elmer was in fact real. The amusement park painted Elmer fluorescent orange and red and hung him by a noose in the laugh-in-the-dark Funhouse. They never realised that the mannequin they used was actually a real human. Elmer actually hung by the noose at the entrance of the haunted house ride for years, welcoming and grinning at guests as they entered the ride. In December 1976, this man died in 1911. A film crew showed up to the film house who were filming for a movie called The $6 Million Man. Elmer was a great prop to have in the background, but during one scene he actually got in the way. They decided to move Elmer out of the way to get a better shot, and this is where things went drastically wrong. A prop man grabbed the arm of a mummified Elmer and his arm snapped clean off. The prop man was clearly distressed, but not because he'd broken a prop, because when he looked at the arm that had broken off, what he saw was flesh and bone, not something you'd expect from a mannequin. Filming stopped and the police arrived. Forensics took away Elmer's body and stripped away the paint, revealing mummified flesh, the bullet wound, and traces of arsenic. In his mouth was a 1924 penny and an old ticket stub from the Museum of Crime. It's just insane. Inside his mouth. Forensics confirmed that it was Elmer McCurdy, dead since 1911. In April 1977, 66 years after Elmer's death, he was finally buried in Oklahoma under 2 foot of concrete so nobody can take his body again. In life, Elmer failed at everything, but his life after death was truly extraordinary. So next time you see a mannequin in a haunted house and you think, it looks a little bit too real, well, maybe it is. And if you thought that this story was strange, wait till you hear the next one. Bye!